Let your mind drift back in time, almost 2,000 years, to an afternoon in ancient Rome. It is 67 A.D. The honey-golden sunlight is pouring down on the cobblestone streets. The air is filled with the scent of baking bread, mixed with the spices of the markets, and the majestic beauty of marble temples stands proudly. Amidst the bustling crowd, you are strolling, feeling the heartbeat of the most powerful empire in the world. Suddenly, an eerie silence falls, the crowd parting as a royal procession slowly approaches. At the center of attention is Emperor Nero, and beside him walks a lovely woman who is said to be the new empress. She is ethereal, draped in silk and jewels that sparkle like falling stars. But as the procession passed, you not only saw admiration, but also the whispers that crept in like a breeze, the glances that exchanged meaningful glances. There was a terrible secret hidden behind that silk curtain, and then the truth was revealed not in a bold statement, but in those fearful whispers that stunningly beautiful woman was, in fact, once a boy named Sporus. What Nero had done to him was not just a whim, but one of the most brutal, systematic, and gruesome cases of psychological and physical abuse in recorded history. This is not simply a story of Roman depravity, but a journey into the darkest recesses of power, to witness how absolute power can turn love into a possessive obsession, turn grief into irreversible madness, and turn a flesh-and-blood man into a lifeless living doll, existing only to serve one's fantasies. If you want to explore such hidden corners of history with us, let's begin this journey together. To understand the deep darkness that swallowed Sporus' life, we must first quietly look at the architect of that tragedy, the emperor named Nero. His story does not begin with cruelty, but rather it is lit by the light of hope. When Nero ascended the throne at the age of 16, all of Rome seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, believing that the dawn of a true golden age had arrived. The young man in his early years ruled with astonishing wisdom, reducing harsh taxes and generously subsidizing the refined pleasures of the people. But the imperial throne was a gilded chalice, bestowing unlimited power, but slowly gnawing at the soul with an invisible venom. Absolute power is absolute loneliness. Imagine a life in which you were the only person in an empire of 60 million people who never heard the word no. Your every whim was command, your every word was truth, and no one dared to challenge or refute you. Gradually, your world shrank into an echo chamber, where only your own voice echoed back, louder and more distorted. Paranoia became his constant companion, for when no one dared to speak the truth, every compliment could be false flattery, every smile could hide a plot. By around 65 A.D., after more than a decade at the height of his power, Nero's mind was literally crumbling like a mirror cracked from reflecting too many empty accolades and self-created ghosts. And it was in this corrupt and fragile state of mind that a figure entered Nero's life, becoming the trigger, the perfect catalyst for the tragedy that was about to unfold, a woman named Poppaea Sabina, whom he declared he loved more than life itself. Poppaea Sabina was more than a woman. She was a fire, a brilliant and dangerous presence entering Nero's already ashen life. With her captivating beauty, her sharp wit, and her bottomless ambition, Poppaea was everything Nero's first wife, the quiet and virtuous Octavia, never was. Their relationship, which began as a courtly affair, quickly degenerated into a toxic obsession, a possessive frenzy on the emperor's part. Love in Nero's eyes was not appreciation, but control. He flew into a frenzied rage when another man so much as looked at his wife for too long. He surrounded her with guards not to protect her, but to monitor her every move, turning the palace into a gilded cage. He lavished the treasury with lavish gifts, not to please her, but to demonstrate his ownership to the world. To win her, Nero bent reality itself, divorcing and then murdering his popular wife Octavia, and then staging an unprecedentedly lavish wedding to crown Poppaea empress. But even after he had her, Nero's obsession with her remained. He isolated her from friends and family, and it is said that he would spend hours silently gazing at her, like a collector admiring his most precious treasure. This was no longer a man's love for a woman, but a tyrant's possessiveness of his most beautiful creation. Yet Poppaea had one fatal flaw, a quality that in a normal world might be considered a virtue. She was fearless. She dared to debate Nero on policy, to criticize his artistic performances, to confront him as an equal rather than a slave. This independence and strength, which had perhaps once attracted Nero, now became a deadly danger, for in his mad world, anyone who did not obey absolutely was a threat that had to be quelled. And then, the inevitable happened one fateful day in 65 AD. Poppaea's courage collided with Nero's madness, and the result was an irreparable tragedy. The story began with a very ordinary quarrel, perhaps because Nero returned late from a chariot race, or because he was too absorbed in his theatrical activities. Poppaea, who was then pregnant with their second child, spoke out perhaps with more directness and force than usual. In an instant, Nero's already fragile control collapsed. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, a single kick or blow fell on his pregnant wife. The emperor's anger vanished as quickly as it had flared, leaving only a cold emptiness and a slowly rising horror as he realized what he had done. The man who could command tens of thousands of soldiers, who could decide the life and death of an empire, was now completely helpless before the consequences of his own actions. There is a tragic scene of Nero throwing himself over Poppaea's dying body, at times begging for her forgiveness, at times using his imperial power to command her to live, as if his will could overcome death itself. But it was all in vain. As Poppaea breathed her last, something inside Nero died with her. This was no longer the grief of a husband losing his wife. It was the utter collapse of a rotten mind, a permanent break with reality. His grief turned into a long madness. He refused to cremate her body according to Roman custom, but ordered her to be embalmed like a pharaoh, an act alien and horrifying to his people. He deified her, founded a cult to worship her, and spent days just sitting and talking to her lifeless body, as if she were still there, still listening. Poppaea was dead, but in Nero's mad world she had become immortal, an eternal obsession that would shape all his later atrocities. In the midst of Nero's mind, being immersed in a world of only himself and Poppaea's ghost, a cruel coincidence occurred, a sickening flash of light in his mad mind. It was a boy named Sporus, then 14 or 15 years old, a freedman in the service of the palace. Like many in his position, his life and death were at the mercy and whim of the emperor, hanging by a thread. What gave his fate an unimaginably tragic turn was his face. Sporus bore an uncanny, almost surreal resemblance to Nero's dead wife. To a sane mind, it was a coincidence, but to Nero, it was a message from the gods, an answer to his grief. He decided not to simply find a replacement, but to recreate Poppaea herself. He ordered the best physicians in Rome to perform a terrible and irreversible operation, castrating Sporus to make him look more feminine. It was more than just a physical mutilation. It was the first step in a systematic plan to erase an identity. From then on, Sporus's life became a construction site, where his old self was destroyed, and a new one was built with terrifying precision. He was forced to give up his name and adopt a new one, Sabina. He was forced to wear gorgeous women's dresses and jewelry that had once belonged to Poppaea, each item an invisible chain tying him to a dead person. Every day he learned how to apply makeup to soften his masculine features, how to style his hair in a ladylike bun, how to walk, sit, and move gracefully. His voice was also forced to change, trained to become higher and clearer. Can you imagine the psychological torture of this process? Every morning the mirror no longer reflected his image, but a stranger wearing his face. Each lesson in gait, each reminder of voice, was a hammer blow deeper into the coffin of his true self. Sporus, the boy who had once been, had disappeared, leaving only Sabina, a tragic creature born of an emperor's madness. And then, in 67 A.D., Nero's monstrous creation was unveiled to the public in a lavish and ceremonial royal wedding. Amid silk gold and false congratulations, Sporus, in the person of Sabina, was officially made Empress of Rome. But behind the splendor lay a heavy silence of horror and disgust, a play in which all the courtiers were forced to act. Sporus's life thereafter was an endless series of days of a play without end. He was granted all the privileges of an empress palace servant's income, but these were only the gilded bars of a gilded cage. The price was that he had to completely erase himself, constantly play the role of Poppaea, remember memories that were not his own, and respond to the affections of a ghost. The pressure of that role gradually wore him down, making Sporus increasingly withdrawn, sad and silent, a lonely figure in the midst of the lavish palace. He was even paraded on his tour of Greece, displayed to the world as a living testament to Nero's insane power. Even when Nero, the creator of tragedy, took his own life in 68 A.D., after the rebellions, the invisible chains that bound Sporus did not break. Freedom did not come. He became a trophy, a living symbol of depravity, passed from one powerful man to another, from Nymphidius Sabinus to Otho to Vitellius. Each of them forced him into the same role, calling him by the name of a dead woman. Finally, when the Emperor Vitellius decided to make him his own entertainment, exposing his body and humiliation to thousands of curious eyes in the Colosseum, it was the last straw. Faced with this final and ultimate humiliation, Sporus did the only thing he could truly do for himself. Around the year 69, he chose death, ending his short and tragic life. It was not an act of defeat, but an act of final self-control, the only way he could kill the doll named Sabina with his own hands, and free Sporus's soul from a world that no longer had a place for him. Sporus's story, when the final curtain closes, leaves us with a silent but haunting warning about the dangers of absolute power, how it can corrode and destroy everything it touches, including the one who wields it. In the old pages of history, his name is often mentioned only as a symbol of Nero's decadence, a strange footnote, rather than a real person with his own dreams and pain. People look at him and see the madness of an emperor, but often forget to look deep into his eyes to see the complete destruction of an identity, the trampling of a human dignity. His entire short life, ever since he caught Nero's eye, had been a process of being stripped, carved, and molded into something he was not. And perhaps that is why his final act, his suicide, despite its ultimate tragedy, had a sacred meaning. It was not a surrender, but the only act of defiance, the first and last choice he could truly make for himself. By choosing death, he refused to continue playing the humiliating role, reclaiming control of his own destiny from those who had treated him like a toy. His story reminds us that behind every great monument, every heroic chapter of history, there are personal stories of pain, of suffering, and of forgotten dignity. Let us take a moment to listen to those silent voices, to sympathize, and to remember that history is not only written by emperors, but also engraved in the silence of victims like Sporus.